I still remember the sound of the glass shattering. It wasn't just the wine that spilled, it was my dignity. That night, in front of every relative, every friend, my father pointed at me like I was a stranger. He didn't shout my name, he announced my disgrace. Everyone froze. The laughter, the music, everything died the moment he said, "You've humiliated this family, Ava. You are not my daughter anymore." I didn't cry. I couldn't. My body refused to move, but my heart, it shattered in silence. It's strange, isn't it? How one sentence can erase 26 years of love, obedience, and sacrifice. I'd spent my life trying to make him proud, and in one moment, he made me an example of shame. People whispered. Cameras recorded. My mother looked away. That was the night my father destroyed my name. But he didn't know, the secret he buried years ago was about to destroy his. Cliffhanger, because the man who called me a disgrace was living a lie bigger than mine. From the outside, the Mitchells looked perfect, a family people admired, envied even. Big house on the hill, matching smiles at every Sunday brunch, and a father who loved being called the man of respect. But inside those polished walls, love had conditions, and silence was the price of peace. My father, Richard Mitchell, believed reputation was everything. He didn't raise children, he raised trophies. My brother Mason was his favorite one, the golden son who carried the Mitchell name with pride. When Mason entered the room, Dad's face softened. When I did, he barely noticed. I learned early that daughters like me existed quietly, to support, not to shine. Mom, Evelyn, played peacekeeper. Her smile was soft, her eyes tired. She'd whisper, "Don't answer back, Ava. You know how your father is." And I'd nod, swallowing every word that wanted to scream. Grace, my younger sister, lived in her own small world, too kind to challenge, too afraid to care. At family dinners, I'd listen more than I spoke. Dad would talk about business, Mason would brag about his latest deal, and Mom would praise them both. If I tried to share something, Dad would interrupt. "Ava, not now," Mason speaking. Every word I held back became another brick in the wall between us. I worked hard, harder than anyone expected me to. I managed our charity accounts, handled family reports, and stayed invisible enough to be useful but never praised. Sometimes, late at night, I'd hear Dad's laughter echoing through the study, the kind reserved for Mason. Not once did I hear it for me. But still, I tried. I bought him gifts on his birthdays, books about leadership, framed photos from my graduation. He'd thank me politely and place them aside. When Mason handed him an expensive watch, Dad's eyes gleamed. I told myself love wasn't about equality, it was about endurance. Our family reunions were the same performance every year, guests complimenting Dad's perfect family. He'd place his arm around Mason and say, "I couldn't be prouder of my son." Then, as if remembering, he'd nod toward me. "And this is Ava, she handles the paperwork." I smiled, even when it stung. Because in this family, pretending was survival. But that illusion began to crack the night I noticed Uncle Daniel's face when Dad made a toast about honesty and legacy. Daniel's eyes didn't match his smile. He looked haunted. And when I asked him later if he was okay, he only whispered, "Some truths shouldn't stay buried forever, Ava." That sentence lingered in my mind for weeks, the way thunder lingers after lightning. Something deeper was wrong. And soon, I was going to find out that our family's respect was built on the biggest lie of all. Cliffhanger, because in the Mitchell family, appearances weren't protection, they were camouflage. It started with one missing document, a simple financial report from my father's company. Something Mason was supposed to handle. But when the file disappeared, the blame landed on me, the family's invisible scapegoat. Dad stormed into the living room that evening, his voice cold, sharp, and calculated. "Ava, where's the client agreement? Mason said you handled the transfers." I looked up from my laptop, stunned. "No, I only reviewed them. Mason was in charge of." "Enough," he snapped, cutting me off. "Stop pointing fingers. Take responsibility for once." Mom stayed silent, eyes fixed on her teacup. Mason stood beside Dad, pretending calm, but his smirk gave him away. He knew exactly what he was doing. That night, I found out Mason had sent the wrong file to a client, causing a huge deal to collapse. Instead of owning his mistake, he convinced Dad I had accidentally deleted the documents. And because I was always the quiet one, the one who never fought back, it was easier for Dad to believe him. I wanted to defend myself, but every word felt like shouting into a storm. Dad, please, I didn't do it. Mason's covering. Enough, Ava. His fist hit the table. Your carelessness cost us thousands. Do you even understand responsibility? The word responsibility stung like acid. I'd been the one cleaning up their messes my whole life. Every late-night report Mason ignored, every deadline Mom forgot. I was there, fixing it quietly, never asking for credit. And still, somehow, I was the one who tarnished the Mitchell name. That week, my father's disappointment became a weapon. He stopped talking to me, except in front of others, where he'd make a show of disciplining me. At a family dinner, he said loudly, "Some people just aren't cut out for our reputation. No matter how much you teach them." Everyone laughed politely. I felt my throat tighten. After dinner, I overheard Mason whispering to Mom, "Dad wants to remove Ava from the company accounts. He says she's a liability." And Mom didn't argue. She just sighed and said, "Maybe it's for the best. She needs to learn her place." Those words, "learn her place," burned into me. What was my place, exactly? The daughter who wasn't good enough to be believed? The one who was expected to sacrifice without recognition? When the board meeting came, I tried to show proof, email trails, files, timestamps, everything that could clear my name. But Dad wouldn't look at them. His voice was calm, but cruel. "Ava, I'm tired of excuses. You've embarrassed this family. Hand over your access to the accounts." I felt the room closing in. My hands trembled, my chest tight with humiliation. Mason sat across from me, smiling faintly. It wasn't victory he felt, it was power. I wanted to scream, to expose him right there. But something stopped me, Uncle Daniel's strange warning. Some truths shouldn't stay buried forever. When I got home that night, I couldn't sleep. I opened my father's study drawer, the one he always kept locked. Inside were old papers, yellowed envelopes, and a letter with a woman's name I'd never heard before, Clara Reynolds. My hands froze. The letter was signed by my father, and the date was from the year I turned 6. Cliffhanger. In that moment, I realized I wasn't the one who had ruined the Mitchell reputation. I was about to uncover who really did. After that night, something inside me changed. I stopped begging to be believed. I started watching instead. Every glance, every whisper, every lie that slipped so easily from their lips. Dad carried on like nothing had happened. To him, the scandal was over, handled. But to me, it had only just begun. Days later, during breakfast, he smiled at Mason across the table. "Good work on the new client, son. You've made me proud again." Then, his eyes brushed over me, cold and dismissive. Ava, I expect you to stay out of business matters from now on." I nodded silently, though my heart screamed. Grace, my sister, gave me a worried look, but she didn't dare speak. That's how it always was, everyone too afraid to go against him. At Sunday dinner, surrounded by relatives, Dad made his next move. He stood up with his wine glass and said, "I believe success runs in the blood. And Mason is proof of that." Everyone clapped. Then he added, with a faint smile, "Of course, not every child shares that same bloodline of ambition." The laughter that followed was soft, but sharp enough to cut through my chest. I excused myself from the table. My mother followed, her voice low and pleading. "Ava, don't take it personally. You know your father. He's just proud." "Proud?" I whispered. "Proud enough to humiliate his own daughter." She looked away. "He's under pressure. Let it go." Let it go, that was always her solution. That night, I went back to his study, the place where his secrets lived. The letter I found earlier had haunted me, Clara Reynolds. I needed to know more. I searched again and discovered a bundle of old letters hidden beneath tax files, all signed by her name. The handwriting was desperate, emotional, love mixed with anger. One line burned into my mind. "You promised to protect me, Richard. You promised to take responsibility." My stomach turned. Responsibility. The same word he'd used to humiliate me. The next morning, I called Olivia, my cousin, my only real ally. She worked as a journalist and knew how to dig into old records. When I told her the name, she went silent for a moment. Then she said, "Ava, I think I've heard of her. There was a woman named Clara Reynolds who disappeared after a business scandal 20 years ago, involving a Mitchell contractor.
I felt my pulse quicken.
Send me everything you find. Over the next few days, the tension in our house grew unbearable. Dad grew more controlling, paranoid even. He'd snap at Mom, scold the staff, and keep his office locked tighter than ever. Mason bragged about his promotion, one I knew was bought with my silence. Every fake smile, every cruel remark chipped away at the last bit of love I had left. Then came the charity gala, another chance for Dad to show off the perfect Mitchell family. He ordered me to attend, as if to prove I was still obedient. But that night, as I stood beside him in a glittering hall filled with cameras, I felt nothing but disgust. His hand rested on my shoulder, a public gesture of affection that felt like poison. And then, under the flashing lights, Olivia texted me 3 words that froze my breath.
I found everything.
Cliffhanger, because the secret my father buried wasn't just a mistake, it was a scandal that could destroy everything he built.
I thought I'd already felt my father's cruelty.
But nothing compared to the night he took away everything that still tied me to the Mitchell name. It was Mason's engagement party, a grand affair at the family estate. Golden lights, live music, journalists, and guests dressed like royalty. My father loved attention, and this was his stage. I arrived quietly, wearing a simple dress. I hadn't planned to stay long. But fate, it seemed, had other intentions. From the moment I entered, I felt the eyes. Whispers followed me like shadows. That's her, the daughter who ruined the deal. Even the staff looked at me differently now, as if my shame was contagious. I spotted Mom near the bar, smiling through exhaustion. When she saw me, her smile faltered. "Ava, maybe stay in the back tonight," she whispered. "Your father doesn't want more drama." "Drama?"
I said quietly.
"I haven't even spoken yet." She sighed, glancing nervously toward him. "Please, just behave. For Mason's sake." Behave. That word again. As if silence was my only virtue. The event was loud with laughter and fake affection. Dad took the stage to give a toast, pride gleaming in his voice. "My son Mason," he said, raising his glass, "is the kind of man who carries our legacy with dignity and honor."
The crowd applauded.
Then his tone shifted, softer, but crueler. In every family, there's one who lifts the name higher, and one who drags it down.
The room fell quiet. I froze. I didn't want to believe what was coming. He turned his gaze toward me. "Tonight, I want to make something clear. I will not let one person's mistakes destroy decades of respect. From this day forward, only Mason will represent the Mitchell legacy. He has earned it." There it was, my disinheritance. Not in a letter, not in private, but in front of hundreds. Every word echoed like a verdict. Gasps. Whispers. Cameras flashing. I stood there, motionless, my throat burning. Mom looked away. Grace tried to move toward me, but Mason stopped her with a subtle shake of his head. "Dad," I said softly, but my voice trembled. "You could have spoken to me in private." He smiled faintly, the kind of smile that hides venom. "I tried, Ava. But you never learn. Maybe public shame will teach you what responsibility looks like." The laughter that followed wasn't cruel, it was worse. It was polite. People pretended not to stare, but every glance told me the same thing: you don't belong here anymore. I walked out before the speeches ended. Outside, under the cold night sky, I felt something inside me break, not my heart, but my silence. For 26 years, I had tried to earn his love. I gave him loyalty, honesty, respect. And he gave me humiliation. I sat in my car, tears blurring the city lights. I thought of every time I had stayed quiet for the sake of peace. Peace had never protected me, it had only protected his image. Then my phone buzzed. It was Olivia. She had sent a folder, documents, screenshots, old reports. Her message read, "It's worse than we thought. Clara wasn't just someone he hurt, she was silenced." I opened the files with shaking hands. Letters between my father and Clara revealed that she had threatened to expose him for falsifying charity funds, donations he redirected into his personal accounts. He had paid her to disappear. And the deal that made him a respected man? It was built on stolen goodwill. The room I had just left, full of laughter, pride, and fake respect, was built on a lie. And the man who had called me a disgrace was the real fraud. Something inside me hardened that night. The tears stopped. The shaking stopped.
Even the pain started to fade, replaced by something colder, purpose. I whispered to myself, staring at the glowing house behind me.
You destroyed my name, Father.
But I'm going to destroy your illusion. That night marked my rebirth, from the daughter he shamed to the woman who would end his lies. He taught me silence as obedience. Now, I would use silence as my weapon. After the engagement, something inside me stopped asking for permission to exist. Humiliation had stripped me bare, but it also cleared the fog. I could either keep bending until I broke, or learn to stand with intent. I chose intent. The first step was small and practical: control. Dad had taken my access to the accounts, but he hadn't taken my mind. I started keeping a notebook: names, dates, inconsistencies, every memory that felt like a loose thread. I memorized the times he left the house, who visited the study, which staff came and went.
I learned the rhythm of his lies. Olivia became my partner.
Her journalism skills and my inside knowledge were a dangerous combination. She dug into Clara Reynolds's file: old police reports, burial records, charity ledgers. Each discovery was a fresh strike against the image my father had built. When she found a receipt that matched a deposit from Dad's charity into a private account, my hands trembled. Not with fear this time, but with purpose. I also found something else in Dad's study: a cassette recorder, outdated, hidden in a showbox. It felt like fate. On a night when he stayed late at the office, I took it. I learned to use it with Olivia's help: how to clean audio, how to splice, how to make a voice undeniable. The plan wasn't to destroy, it was to reveal a pattern so clear that denial would sound desperate. Emotionally, I rehearsed my boundaries. I stopped answering calls meant to guilt me into silence. I told Grace, gently but firmly, I'm not asking for your support. I'm telling you where I stand. Her eyes filled with confusion and fear, but she didn't stop me. Even Mom's messages, soft, pleading, bounced off me like rain on stone. I needed them to be neutral witnesses, not actors in my collapse. The strategy had 3 parts. First, public evidence: recordings and documents tying Dad to Clara's silencing and the misdirection of charity funds. Second, witnesses. Uncle Daniel's evasive comments had been a clue. I began asking him open questions, letting him talk, letting him reveal himself in small ways. Third, media placement, a live event where exposure would be impossible to edit away: a charity gala, a board meeting, a filmed toast. Something public enough that reputation couldn't buffer the fall. I rehearsed the moment in my mind until I could feel every heartbeat like a metronome. There would be no yelling, no sensational theatrics. I wanted truth to land like a stone dropped into still water. The ripples would reach everyone. I imagined pressing play on the recording, watching faces drain of color, feeling the hush that replaces applause. The thought steadied me. Yet, beneath the plan's logic, a human fear lived. What if the recordings were dismissed? What if Uncle Daniel clammed up? What if I became the villain in everyone's eyes again? The uncertainty was a knife, but I learned to hold it without flinching. That was new power, not the raw urge for revenge, but a disciplined patience that kept me poised. On the night before I would act, I sat alone in my car, cassette in my lap, documents in a folder beside me. The city lights blurred like a threshold between the woman I had been and the one I was becoming. I whispered to myself, steady and small, this is not about vengeance. This is about truth. Then my phone buzzed, Olivia's name flashing. She sent one short message: tomorrow. Are you ready? Cliffhanger. I looked at the recorder, then at the folder, and for the first time, I wondered, if I press play, can I survive what follows? The night of the charity dinner arrived, the same hall where my father had once paraded our family as a symbol of success. Crystal chandeliers hung like frozen tears, and the guests shimmered in gold and silk. It was supposed to be another Mitchell masterpiece, a night of applause and reputation. But tonight, the applause would die on its own. I stood near the stage, calm but cold inside. The recorder sat hidden in my clutch, the documents tucked safely in my jacket pocket. Olivia was already there, pretending to mingle, her phone connected to the sound system. Everything was ready. All that remained was courage. Dad took the microphone with his practiced smile, the one that had fooled half the city. He began his speech. Ladies and gentlemen, the Mitchell Foundation has always stood for honesty, integrity, and trust. We've built our name on values that can't be bought. The audience clapped.
I felt the irony crush my chest. Then he continued, voice proud and self-assured.
Tonight, we celebrate a family legacy that I hope my children will carry with the same respect I've tried to uphold.
Respect. That word again. His favorite lie. I stepped forward.
May I say something, Father?
The room went still.
His smile froze, but he masked it quickly. Of course, Ava, he said through clenched teeth. Though I wasn't expecting speeches from everyone tonight. It won't take long.
My voice was steady, almost too calm. I walked to the microphone.
Hundreds of eyes followed me. For a second, my hands trembled, but I held on. Tonight, I began, I'd like to talk about what this foundation really stands for.
About truth. Dad's eyes narrowed. Ava. But I didn't stop.
For years, I've been told that respect is everything. That silence protects dignity. But silence doesn't protect dignity, it protects liars. A nervous laugh rippled through the crowd.
Cameras turned toward us.
Olivia gave a subtle nod from the back, the signal. I pressed play. The speakers crackled, and then came his voice, younger, raw, and unmistakably his.
Clara, you can't tell anyone.
If this gets out, everything I've built will crumble.
Take the money.
Leave the city. This conversation never happened. Gasps filled the hall. The air thickened with disbelief. The recording continued, exposing every ugly detail, the charity fraud, the bribes, the silencing. Every sentence stabbed through the illusion he'd built. Dad lunged forward.
Turn that off.
That's not me. Someone. But Olivia played the second clip, his confession from a private voicemail. I did what I had to do. No one will ever find out.
The truth had found him. Guests whispered. Cameras flashed.
Reporters whispered his name like a curse. Mom's face went pale. Grace began to cry quietly. Mason stood frozen, his hand still clutching a champagne glass he hadn't tasted.
Uncle Daniel stepped up slowly. His voice broke the silence. It's true, he said. I warned you, Richard.
I told you this would come back one day. Dad's voice cracked. Daniel, don't you dare.
But it was over.
For the first time in my life, my father looked small, stripped of authority, stripped of respect. He turned to me, eyes burning with fury and disbelief. You think this makes you righteous?
No, I said softly.
It makes me free. Security guards began whispering, guests started leaving, and journalists began recording statements. Everything he valued, control, image, reputation, crumbled right before his eyes. Mom reached for me, whispering, Ava, what have you done?
I looked at her gently.
What you couldn't. And then I walked off the stage, calm, steady, unbroken. Behind me, I heard the sound of the microphone clattering to the floor. The same sound that had once marked my humiliation now echoed his downfall. As I reached the door, I paused and looked back one last time. My father stood there in the ruins of his perfection. The same man who had called me a disgrace, now publicly exposed by his own truth. I whispered, just loud enough for him to hear. You destroyed my name to save yours. Tonight, I return the favor. And as the cameras flashed behind me, I realized, justice doesn't always shout. Sometimes, it plays quietly, until everyone hears it. When the lights dimmed and the last guest left, silence finally returned to the hall, a kind of silence that felt heavier than sound itself. The chandeliers still glimmered, but the illusion of our family's perfection had shattered. My father stood alone near the stage, staring at the broken microphone. The proud man who once commanded attention now looked small. The empire he built on lies had collapsed in one evening, not by violence, but by truth. I walked out slowly, my heels clicking against the marble floor, each step echoing the years I'd walked in his shadow. Outside, the night air was cold but freeing. For the first time, I wasn't afraid to breathe. Reporters shouted my name, flashes went off, but I didn't answer any questions. Some stories don't need explanations, they just need to end. I looked up at the sky, remembering every night I'd cried wondering what was wrong with me, why I wasn't enough, why love had conditions. Now I knew, I was never the problem. I was simply too honest for a family built on secrets.
The next morning, the city was talking.
Headlines read, Richard Mitchell's empire exposed by his own daughter. Some called me brave, others called me cruel. But none of them knew the years of silence that came before this moment.
None of them knew how much pain it takes to finally speak.
Mom came to see me days later. She looked smaller too, not in body, but in spirit. She sat across from me, eyes tired, hands trembling. "You destroyed everything your father worked for," she whispered.
I met her gaze calmly. "No, Mom."
"I just ended what never should have begun."
She didn't argue.
She just looked away, tears silently falling.
I realized then, she was as much a prisoner of his pride as I had been.
And maybe, in her own quiet way, she envied my freedom. Grace and Mason didn't call. But I didn't hate them anymore. I understood now, when people are raised in someone else's shadow, they mistake obedience for love.
I had done the same once. Weeks passed.
The house I'd grown up in was sold, the company under investigation, and the Mitchell name, once a symbol of pride, became a cautionary tale. But in that ruin, I found peace. I started my own foundation, small, honest, transparent, in memory of the people hurt by men like my father. Every donation, every handshake, every act of kindness felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. One afternoon, as I closed the office for the day, a young woman stopped me outside.
"You're Ava Mitchell, right?" she asked. "You're the reason I spoke up against my boss."
"You gave me courage." I smiled, not out of pride, but quiet understanding. Sometimes, the greatest revenge isn't destruction. It's inspiration. As I watched her walk away, I finally said the words I'd never been able to speak. I forgive him. Not because he deserved it, but because I deserved peace. I turned toward the sunset, warm, soft, and endless, and whispered the line that had carried me through everything. Dignity isn't given by others. It's reclaimed when you stop asking for it. And with that truth, I walked forward, not as the daughter he disowned,
but as the woman I was always meant to be.